Paul Campbell on Twitter, way to go, Paul, talks a lot about goaltending.
Yeah.
Has this question for you. Could you review any special roster provisions for COVID this season? Doing it for both vaccinated and unvaccinated players would be very useful. Thanks. Hashtag Ask CJ.
Sorry, Paul, because I didn't do my research on this one, and so I don't have a complete answer. I do know that in the CBA or in the transition rules that were agreed upon just a week or two ago, there is contemplated in there the possibility they'll bring back taxi squads if needed. As the season's starting right now, in fact, we're basically talking, Julian, when teams have to file their cap compliant opening day roster. It's like the old days, 23 person maximum roster, $81.5 million salary cap. Basically all the old rules apply. There's no special provisions, but I think if the COVID situation, if the league's dealing with outbreaks, you could see a return to taxi squads, which the NHL used last year, which were players that didn't count against the cap, travel with the team. So that's a possibility. When it comes to vaccinated versus unvaccinated players, should have reviewed this document because I saw his question in my queue and I just meant to look it all up. But, I know, for example, unvaccinated players can't go out on the road, can't be around teammates, have to wear a mask everywhere, have to do their interviews even in a mask. So that's one reason you'll always know who is unvaccinated is if they're talking to reporters with a mask on, it's a tell. And if those players miss time due to COVID, unvaccinated, I believe they can be suspended without pay. Meaning, if you have a COVID-related absence or if you can't travel into Canada, like Tyler Bertuzzi, for example, who's spoken to reporters in Detroit about his choice not to be vaccinated. There's 9 games as of now, unless he changes his position on that, where he can't come into Canada and play road games because of the quarantine rules that the government has in place. So, he won't be paid for those days, is my understanding. But, I don't have a total view of that answer because I didn't dive into the notes, but I'll look it up and be sure to be fresh on that in the future.
Oh, I will tell you what, though, for someone who says that they weren't well researched on it, I think you still gave a pretty good answer. I think the taxi squad thing, I didn't realize that they were going to continue doing that. And I think that's a pretty big deal.
Only if they need it. So yeah, we're not starting with a taxi squad, but it's written in the rules that basically the players in the league acknowledge that it might be required at some point. And so that could be something that exists. And, I think that was good for a lot of players. I mean, I'm sure it was a long season for guys who didn't get to play much, but you do get to be up with the team and to skate with them. You're getting the NHL per diem, you're around the group. And, obviously some of those players did find themselves into games. But as it is right now, those players that run taxi squads are in the American Hockey League right now, riding the buses again.
Next question. I'm actually intrigued for your perspective on this because I've been asked this a lot and I don't have any intel and I just think it's a weird situation. So I'm actually very curious about yours. This is from Cheering the Logo on Twitter. 3 times nominated for GM of the Year in 9 years, bringing his team to the Stanley Cup Finals a few months ago. Hard to imagine that salary is the sticky point for Jeff Molson to bring back Marc Bergevin. What's really going on there? Backlash from the Mailloux selection? What do you think?
I think it's salary, frankly, and probably term of that contract. I mean, it's sort of like any deal that isn't done. It's figuring out what the numbers are. I think that's really what's holding it up. It's my belief that Marc Bergevin would be willing to stay for a period of time, but he's been there a long time. I think it's about a decade, if I'm not mistaken, Julian. So,
yeah, since 2012.
I'm not sure he's in a position where you'd see him signing a 5 or 6 year extension. I could see him wanting to opt for something a little shorter, obviously get a raise given some of the credentials that you mentioned in the question. And, they haven't been able to do that. And let's face it, he's in a completely unique situation because, he's coaching a team where, the French language he's the GM of a team in which the French language issue is an issue. I've talked to some people in Montreal I know that think the GM shouldn't have to speak French because, GM, unlike a coach, isn't speaking to reporters really all that regularly as it is, but certainly not every day. I don't know how the fan base feels about that, but the organization clearly has largely opted for French-speaking general managers. And so there's not a huge pool of qualified people, especially with Julian Brisebois getting his extension done in Tampa, that you would say if Marc Bergevin left Montreal, who would be the next GM? I don't think there's an obvious answer. It's not to say there are no candidates, but there's probably not a huge pool there. And so it's a unique negotiation because Marc, of course, would understand that. Jeff Molson would understand that. And so to get him signed, you might have to pay a bit of a premium, not only for his accomplishments, but also because of, the way he fits into that job. And so, it's too soon to say he's definitely gone. I think it points to him leaving after the season, but that's still 250 days from now. Let's let this play out a little bit more. I'm not 100% convinced he's out the door. I don't think he'll be there long term just because it's a really demanding job to do it in a city like Montreal because of the two languages, because of the intense focus on the team. And so, I think there's room for a short-term deal to get sorted out. It just didn't materialize before the season, and they've decided to put it off until the off season.
I think that being a general manager of the Montreal Canadiens is the hardest job you could have of all 32 teams in the National Hockey League. I understand the media pressure that comes to anyone in Toronto. If you have that job as GM, considering their position in sports and what have you, but in Montreal, you have to deal with the Anglo and the Francophone media and that intense pressure on you, being in a market where it's not so much that it's a sports market. It's clearly the Canadiens, and then everything else just kind of falls by the wayside. So I also can understand why some media members might feel that a general manager in the city might also have to be French speaking. I don't necessarily think it has to be, but I think if I were to hear out from some other media members, I'm not going to act as if I know every single one that agree on that point or not, but I would be willing to hear them out on why that person would have to be French speaking. But it is interesting that the issue of salary keeps coming up, because I would think that after the run that he had, if the Canadiens wanted to keep him, I didn't think it would be that big of an issue, unless for some reason, and this is just me talking here, what if Marc Bergevin wanted more money than what Julian Brisebois is getting out in Tampa Bay? And this is a guy who's just coming off back-to-back Stanley Cup championships. And if it wasn't for him extending with the Tampa Bay Lightning, Jeff Molson should be making his way down to Tampa trying to get him.
Right. And I don't know if it has to be more money, but I think it's got to be something in that vicinity. Julian, I believe, got somewhere around $4.5 million on his extension. And so, again, it doesn't have to be that exact dollar figure, I don't think. But, look, Marc Bergevin would like a raise. I think everyone has the right to ask for that. And let's not totally divorce ourselves from the wider situation going on here. This has not been a time when NHL franchises have been collecting much money. And
nope.
We saw the Canadiens playing a Stanley Cup final with a building that was 10% full or whatever it was. They missed out on a revenue opportunity there because of COVID. And so, it's a tough time to be giving anybody a raise when the cash flow hasn't been where you'd like it to be in the past. And so, I'm not saying they can't afford it, but I think it's a little tougher financial decision given some of the uncertainty over this coming year. Obviously in Canada, the buildings are starting full, but, I think there's an understanding if there's COVID outbreaks or something that might not last all year long. And so there's a lot of different dynamics at the table here, but I do think a lot of them revolve around the financial piece.
Absolutely.